And welcome back. As we go ahead and continue working with conditionals, we're going to go ahead and take a moment to look at the Boolean expressions themselves to kind of get a better understanding of what they are and how they work. So when we start talking about Booleans, recall that these are ways for us to test if something is true or false. And we've done this mostly through the use of if-else statements to really kind of evaluate something. And the true or false, of course, are results of what is a Boolean. Remember, we talked about Booleans as one of our primitive types that we have in Java. Now, any conditional that we code is merely to test if something is true or false. That's ultimately what it's doing. It's looking to see, is this true? And then we can do some code, or if it's false, we're going to do something else, and we're going to bypass it. Now, simple expressions such as time is less than limit are examples of what's known as a Boolean expression because we're testing two different things, and so therefore it's an expression. Kind of like in math where you can have mathematical expressions, but we can have the same things here with Booleans. Now, let's just quickly recap some of those comparative operators that we've talked about with that Booleans. So we, of course, have our less than symbol. We have our greater than. We have our equal to, and remember with equal to, the big thing is here is you have two equal signs. We have not equal to. We have greater than or equal to, and we have less than or equal to. Again, we've seen these, we've been using these, but it's good just to kind of brush back up on what are those operators and what are we going to be using them for. Now, a quick note, remember with equals equals, we don't want to compare using a single equal sign. Remember, a single equal sign is more set the value of. All right, we're changing something so it's equal to a new value. So whenever we want to do a comparison, we want to instead have that be equals equals because, again, single equal, you're assigning a value. Equals equals is we're testing if something is equal to something else. And when we do strings, remember strings are special. They don't actually have an equals equals because there's not a string primitive type in Java. Instead, string is a class type. And so instead to test strings, we have to either use dot equals or dot equals ignore case to get a good equality test there. Now when we start evaluating some of these simple Boolean expressions, we have done this so far, again, with our if-else statements. Time is less than limit, balance is less than or equal to 10. When we look at Boolean expressions by themselves, these do not need to be enclosed in parentheses. So like if I were to say like Boolean is true and I have it, time is less than limit equal to that, I would not have to encapsulate that in a set of parentheses. But if I do a Boolean expression inside of if statement, because of how if statements are set up, we have to make sure that Boolean expression is inside parentheses. So again, this is nothing that we haven't seen so far, but it's just a good kind of refresher to understand how these mechanics work. Now, when we start talking about the conditional operators in Boolean expressions, so let's look at a sample code. I say if num1 is greater than num2, max is equal to n1, else max is equal to n2. This right here is, of course, a conditional statement that we're familiar with. However, you could also technically, for something simple like this, you can use the conditional operator, which is the question mark, and a semicolon to really kind of test things. So, for example, we could say max is equal to n1 greater than n2. Notice, again, still in parentheses. Use the question mark, which is our conditional operator, and then we say n1, n2, because it's testing those two variables. Now, while you can do this for our purposes, we're going to continue using if-else statements when we're constructing our Boolean expressions because while you can use that way, I know sometimes that can be confusing and, because it's a different type of syntax that you may not be used to, whereas we are currently still very much used to using if-else statements that we can stick with those. Now, we can also use Booleans in a conditional branch. So we could take a Boolean variable, actually, and use it as part of the evaluation if statement. And so they can actually, in a way, be their own expression. So, for example, we have a couple here. If is positive equals true. We have if is odd equals false. So you can explicitly test if something is true or if something is false. We can, of course, also say like indivisible by 3. So remember, the Boolean is going to have a true-false value. So it would evaluate this here to see if this is true or false. And here we have is inside pressure limits, and notice there's a not. So that's going to invert that value. So whatever is inside pressure limits is set to before this if statement is going to, again, flip it. So if it was true, it will now be false. If it was false, it will now be true. And now that we're in Eclipse, let's go ahead and just do some quick conditional statements here. So we're going to go ahead and quickly just test. Let's just test if is positive. And so we're going to assume, let's say this is true. I'm just going to do a simple system.out.println. And you'll notice right now is positive is not giving me a value here. So let's just say this is true. Well, why is that? Well, if you look at it, it says it's not initialized because we didn't initialize the variable. All right, so we have to make sure if we're going to use a Boolean in a conditional test like this, we have to make sure we give it an initial value. And notice when we initialize this, it initialized it to false. All right, so if I were to run this code as is right now, one of the things that we will notice is we get no output because, again, we're looking to see that this is true. But if we look at our initialization, this is false. If I change this to true, and then I rerun it, so we get the output we're expecting. So, pretty cool there. So let's just do another quick if. Let's do is divisible by 3. And this time, notice we don't have a error here because we initialize it to false. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this print line statement here. And let's go ahead and invert that with a not conditional. So I'm saying not. So I'm adding that exclamation point there. And now, of course, if I run it, I get 2 this is true statements. All right, and of course, we can also do this with other tests that we have done before. So for example, if I say if num1 is less than or equal to num2, we can, of course, have a expression that way. So let's just do system.out.println, and we'll just say something like num1 is smaller. And again, this is nothing that we haven't really kind of seen yet, but it's just a great way for us to, again, recap how these Boolean expressions work. And I'll do one more with the string test here. Let's just do if, and since it's word, let's do word.length. Let's just go ahead and do one with word.length, because we can also do a comparison off that. Since we get a numeric value, we can say is, let's say, greater than 5. And we can go ahead and do a quick print line there, system.out.println. And we can say the word is not small. Now you might be wondering, why could I use a inequality here and not necessarily have to use dot equals or dot equals nor equals? Well, that's because here, even though word is a string type, the big thing to remember here is that I'm not actually getting a string value. Word.length actually returns a numerical value. And so because it returns a numerical value and not a string value, I can then easily come in here and just do a numeric comparison with less than equal to, greater than. I could even do equals equals, again, because we are not getting a string type here. So that's just one little thing to keep in mind here if you start evaluating Boolean expressions and you evaluate instead a method that's going to get you something that's going to be a different type. So just keep that in mind as you work on your code moving forward.